Historical Society actually was formed in 1986, and our current mayor, Tom Reed, was mayor at that time, and he wrote a letter to Victor Coppinger saying that Pearland, being the growing community that it was, that we needed to form a historical society to let people know that the town had a history. And anyway, his letter to Vic was the start of Historical Society. And Victor Coppinger got it off the ground in 1986. And the whole purpose is to preserve the history and heritage of old Pearland. Pearland's grown so much, most people don't realize what a small community it was back years ago. So that's basically the purpose of the Historical Society. And we have about 200 members in our Historical Society, and our members are scattered all over the United States. We do a newsletter once a quarter. We have quarterly meetings, and we have an annual reunion luncheon, and people come. That's in October, and people come from all over the country for that reunion luncheon. So basically, that's the purpose of our Historical Society. One of the notable persons is David Scott, and David Scott is 92 years old. He's the oldest native-born Pearland male citizen, and also he has the distinction that he made the first touchdown ever made by a Pearland Oiler. In 1937, they built a high school here. The original high school the original school was built in 1912 with a bond issue. It was a two-story brick building, bond issue $6,000 for building the school. It was built in 1912, and in 1915, a hurricane blew the second story off the building. So for the next 22 years, Pearland High School kids had to go to Webster High School. So in 1937, when they established the new high school, they brought a coach in here to have a football team, and he had to lay out a field and get a schedule. And they had played one game, and that was Lamarck. And David Scott, who's our oldest native-born male citizen, was the quarterback on the team, and he scored the first touchdown ever scored by a Pearland Oiler. All the paintings that we have on the wall here in our new home for the Historical Society were donated to the Historical Society by Fran Coppinger, the widow of ex-mayor Victor Coppinger. After Vic died, she donated these paintings. This painting is of the old depot, and the one over behind me is the school that was rebuilt after the 1915 storm. When the storm blew the second story off of that building, then they rebuilt, and for the next 15 years, that was just an elementary school. On the back wall, we have a painting of the Suburban Garden Hotel. And Suburban Garden Hotel sat just on the west side of the railroad track. And when it was built it's no longer there, but it was built in the early 1900s. And when the land developers would bring people down by railroad, they would put them up at the old Suburban Gardens Hotel, and then take them around over the area to show them the land. And then the other picture on the right back there is the old Methodist church. And originally in Pearland, until about 1940, we only had one church. And different denominations would use that church, but that was the only church. And of course, the Pearland Methodist Church, First Methodist Church, does have a Texas historical marker. with the history of the church on it, but I did want to mention that we were very grateful to Fran Coppinger for donating the pictures, the paintings. Well, to maintain the history and heritage of the town it's very, I think, very important, because the town does have some very, very interesting history. We have some, we don't have a lot of written history about Pearland, but we do have some history that was written by former Mayor Vic Coppinger's mother. In 1940, she wrote a brief history of Pearland, and the history is very interesting, because the founder of Pearland was a gentleman called Witold Zielinski. His picture hangs in City Hall, but he was a man of mystery, because Grandma, or Ms. Coppinger, when she wrote about him, and also another person who wrote the history was a lady named Julia Hunter. And when they wrote about Zielinski, they said he traveled around the town. Old Pearland, I'm going to digress a little bit, but Old Pearland, when it was laid out, it's from Orange Street on the east to Walnut Street, Orange Street on the north, Walnut Street on the south, Galveston on the east, and Austin on the west. That was Old Pearland, and it was laid out, and Zielinski was the man who platted this town, filed a plat in 1894, and he was trying to sell land. And Grandma Hunter and Ms. Coppinger talked about how he traveled around the area in a little surrey, fancy surrey, with two black, shiny, high-stepping horses. And, you know, to us in the modern time, we thought, yeah, well, typical real estate salesman. But the point they made was that he was supposed to be of Polish nobility. He was supposed to be a Count Zielinski. Well, the guy disappeared after he laid out Pearland. He disappeared, and for up until about 4 or 5 years ago, that's all we knew about him. And then one of our Historical Society members who lives in Denver, Tommy Hunter, who was the grandson of Ms. Hunter who wrote the story, he traced down Zielinski's great-grandson, who is a retired Major General out of the Air Force. He was Surgeon General in the Air Force. His name is William Willoughby. And Willoughby, at that time, was writing a family history of the Zielinski family. And he really had an interesting story, but he didn't know that his great-grandfather had been in Pearland at all. He had left New York. His Zielinski's wife, he married her over in Poland, and she was a descendant of Zachary Taylor, former president, an ex-president of the United States. And they sent her over to Poland as a 16-year-old girl to go to finishing school, and she married this person who was a Polish count. They came to this country, and he's got it started in the coal business in New York and went broke, so he started south to just an entrepreneur type guy. And his great-grandson didn't know about him being in Pearland at all. But we did get a picture, we did get a life story. He actually was from nobility. His picture hangs in City Hall. And when we dedicated Zielinski Park, it's over the city park that has a Texas historical marker. His great-grandson came down for the dedication. So, I don't know where we started with this, but that's where I ended up.